Hey everyone, my name is Gavin, and today I'm going to be doing my top 15 comic book villains. I did a poll on Instagram asking what you guys want me to do, and this is what you chose, so let's get into it, I guess. Now, I know this is an odd pick considering the fact that, well, I don't see this on many people's high-tier comic book movie villains list, but yeah, please hear me out. I don't exactly think this is one of the greatest villains of all time in any sense, technically, but he fits so perfectly with the tone of the movie that it's going for. The first two Superman movies are really cheesy, even if they have really good arcs for Superman as a character and good stories. Zod is just really cheesy and fun to watch. He doesn't exactly serve as a complete interesting, deep, and compelling character, but he fits so perfectly with the tone that it's really hard not to put him on this list. But yeah, once we go along, we'll see more deeper and more compelling villain. This is once again a pretty controversial one, but I will say Ra's al Ghul is a great villain at the same time. I know some people say, oh yeah, he randomly turns out randomly in the movie, but the thing is that he did that. The reason why that is because, well, they did that because they needed to build up Batman as a character. Batman was more important to them, but that doesn't mean Ra's al Ghul is not a great villain. He's a big threat to Batman because he taught Batman everything that Batman knows, so that makes him a great threat in that aspect. And the fact that he kills and Batman doesn't kill, even though, he kind of redefined that. He still kind of does kill people in the movie, but yeah, let's not talk about that. But the point is that that's what makes him such a great threat to Batman. Is because of that, and he taught Batman everything he knew, and that's why I think I consider him such a great villain. Okay, so yeah, Sandman, which I don't think many people would really agree with this at all, of saying he's like one of the best comic book villains ever, but I think he truly is. He ties us back to Peter. It ties it back to Peter Parker. I know some people really complain about the fact that it's not directly comic accurate and that this is not how it was, but the thing is, it ties back to what affected Peter. It ties back to him, his regrets. Peter isn't someone seeking justice. He is Spider-Man because of guilt for what happened. So seeing him interact a ton more with the killer and having the killer in the final movie makes a bit more sense, and seeing the fact that it was an accident, and that showing that not all villains are this heartless, not all villains are like this, that they're not all terrible, heartless, ruthless people. And we see that he didn't mean to kill him. He was a car thief, and he was just trying to take the car, and he accidentally pulled the trigger. When do you ever see that in any type of movie ever? When do you ever see that in any type of comic book movie is what I'm trying to say here. And the way they just show that is so brilliant. It ties back to the hero. We see the conflict between Spider-Man and Sandman, and when they finally are talking to one another and we see that scene of connection, it's brilliant. Sandman is such an underrated villain. He deserves way more recognition, and yeah, he's probably one of the greatest Spider-Man villains ever, to be honest. Now, if this is the interpretation that is comics accurate or not, I wouldn't know, but the thing is with it is he's just so fun to watch. The actor gives a great performance at playing Lex Luthor, even if it's not from the other interpretations I've seen him in. He gives a great performance, and you really love seeing him as Lex Luthor. He's entertaining to watch, and you really get to see him as somewhat of a mastermind with the plans and schemes he's able to come up with. And unlike the one in Batman vs. Superman, he doesn't give a really weird and awkward performance that just feels like the Joker. So yeah, that's a plus. Yeah, I absolutely love this interpretation of Lex Luthor. He's entertaining to watch, and like I said before, he's able to we get to see the intelligent side of him as we see him come up with these plans. This is a villain most people seem to overlook, and I really don't get that at all. I think he's a great villain because somehow he's able to tie in, his plan is tied into his hatred for Spider-Man. So Spider-Man, which is like the whole ideology of part of what makes this movie so important is what it's like to be Spider-Man, as well as it ties in to the whole plot of the movie of him, of tying into him the dimensions and everything, like the fact that, hey, these are all characters from different dimensions and such, and that's happening as well, and it ties in his hatred for Spider-Man, his hatred for who he hates the most, and as we discover what it's like to be them. So it kind of ties in a lot of the important stuff that's been happening in the film, and I think that's interesting as well. He's a really big rival that is able to rival Miles very well. It's a great villain. I don't know why people don't like him as much.
So yeah, this is another villain on here from the Raimi trilogy, which is my favorite Marvel trilogy, I guess, if you'd suppose that as something very impressive. I think with this character is the fact that you clearly see him neglecting Harry. You see him as this neglective father that looks up to Peter, and we see the emotional weight of this. We see the emotion that's going into this because we know who this is, and we see this whole thing happen, and we understand the emotional weight because of the connection that Peter Parker has with the Green Goblin, and the amount of neglection that he had with Harry, and how he was this person that descended into madness. And as it sets up this, and when the Green Goblin dies, this sets up the arc for Harry Osborn to try to go after Peter Parker and then sacrifice himself at the end of Spider-Man 3. So it helps set up, but at the same time he's a very compelling and interesting villain because of the emotional connection that he has with our hero. So what does make this character work so well? I think one of the main things that does work about this character is the fact that it's the point that the main villain is trying to make. He's the side villain that is at first the good guy, and then we see him become and descend into this type of character. We see that Joker's point the whole time was to show that the most hopeful men, the most good men can fall, and that was the entire point that Joker was trying to make the entire movie. It ties into it so well. It ties into Batman. It ties into everything that this movie is setting up just by the side villain, just the villain that's not even the main villain, and they do it so well, so shockingly well, that it just blows my mind that they were able to pull this off so perfectly.
So yes, I absolutely love this character, and it's one of my favorite Sam Raimi villains in the Spider-Man trilogy. I think what makes this character work so much is how progressive of an arc it is. All these villains normally are in one movie and that's it, but he's the only really actual kind of villain that's from the beginning of the trilogy and has a progressive arc throughout, which even though we saw coming, we don't want it to happen, and we don't want Harry to go in this sort of state. We don't want this to happen to Harry, but we know it's gonna happen because if you know anything about Spider-Man, you know that's what happens is he becomes the new Green Goblin, and the sacrifice that he has in Spider-Man 3 is phenomenal, and it completes Harry's arc from at the beginning being Peter's friend that's neglected by his father, to slowly wanting to kill Spider-Man, to at the end finally sacrificing himself, and it just works so well. And if you think about it, it's like some of the other arcs in this, where with Doc Ock it's the same. It's not really like that Green Goblin. I don't think he really redeems. Maybe I'm wrong, but I mean it's like that with Doc Ock as well, which is another villain we'll get to later. But yeah, this is a phenomenal arc, and it's undeniably one of the greatest superhero villain arcs ever. Okay, so yeah, Thanos. I know some people are gonna be really angry at me. I think the only thing that really holds him back is he was so awful in Endgame. Take over the tri-state era. He was a good threat, so I guess that's why he's not completely off the list. But besides that, he was really bad in Endgame. He was still a good threat, but it just kind of took away everything that made him interesting. But the thing is, Thanos is a villain that thinks he's doing the right thing. He thinks that what he's doing is right, and that's what makes him such a great and compelling villain. It's Thanos, okay? Do I need to say any more? It's Thanos. I love Thanos. It's just an Endgame wasn't that great. I don't need to explain what makes him so great. You guys know why Thanos is great. Thanos is great, okay? You know why. Okay, so this is a great villain. While I wouldn't consider this my favorite Spider-Man villain, we'll get to that when we get to that. I think you probably know what it is, but I think this is a phenomenal villain. I think Michael Keaton is an outstanding actor. In fact, he's probably one of my favorite actors. He was in Batman 1989, which I actually rewatched recently, and it's like one of my favorite movies now. So, yeah, I love him in that. He's like probably the best Bruce Wayne. And in this movie, he's so great at playing the opposite of that, the villain. And we see him in that scene in the car. His performance is practically mesmerizing, and he hits it perfectly. It's so threatening. Like, you fear him so much, but at the same time you sympathize with him because he's not this baddie that's trying to like destroy the world or anything. He just wants to make money for his family, and that's part of what makes him such a phenomenal villain, is because of that. He probably knows what he's doing isn't completely right. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but he's doing it for his family, and that's what works so well about him. And the connection with, the twist, I don't think that anyone saw that coming, even if I don't think it's as great. And because she's kind of just not in the other movie, like Liz isn't in the other one, and it's just like Peter's first crush or whatever, so it's like there's not as much emotional weight to it. But at the same time, it's an interesting twist that connects it in an interesting way. But yeah, Vulture's a great villain, undeniably. So with this one, I think this is a bit more underrated. I know some people really love him. I love him, of course, obviously, so he's really high on the list. But some people don't seem to love him as much as I do, and I guess I'll just explain why I adore him so much as a villain. He's so threatening, not because he's this big, evil guy with the sky portal with aliens coming out of it or anything like that, or he's like this big, mastermind or something that's like really strong or something, he's able to actually get the Avengers to break apart. He breaks them apart. He's able to do that somehow, and he wins. The villain wins. This is like one of the few rare times where the villain actually wins in the movie, and this time he actually was able to succeed in his plan. He tries to take the Avengers apart, and he does it. He's able to do it, and it's heartbreaking because we know that neither of these are the bad guy. Tony's right. He's also kind of wrong. Cap's right, but he's also kind of wrong. Baron Zemo is the villain, who's the man in the chair, pulling all the puppet master, pulling all the strings, and succeeds at it. And that's just so shocking that they were able to do that. That the MCU did this type of thing and was able to do it so brilliantly well, because they just crafted such a brilliant villain that you normally don't see in these MCU movies, and they did it so good. Now, this is an interesting one because in a way this plays out like a Cobra Kai character arc. If you know what I mean, you've seen Cobra Kai, you know what I mean, because the character Loki has been on pretty much every side. At the beginning, he's not really that great, but he's like not evil. Then he's evil in the first Thor movie, and then he sacrifices himself, and then he's evil. So we really never know what's going on in his head. We never know if he's on the good side or if he's on the bad side. unlike Zuko in Avatar: The Last Airbender, where we know, what's going on with him. We know that he's fighting between good and bad, but in this one, we don't know. Is he fully on the good side? Is he fully on the bad side? Is he fighting in between? We don't know. And the redemption he has at the beginning of Avengers Infinity War feels pretty vague, but at the same time, it's a sacrifice that makes sense since Loki is constantly switching sides, constantly going from the good side to the bad side, and then we see, it's a lame thing, but like constantly going from good, being bad, and constantly like that. And then we see him and then we see him in this movie where he finally sacrifices himself, and that's a phenomenal way to open up the movie, to be honest. Loki's such a great character. I love Loki. I don't know what they're gonna do with the Disney Plus TV show. I don't think anyone has the slightest idea of what's gonna happen. It's like the whole thing with Vision where he was brought back and no one really knew why. They're doing that, but with Loki, I guess. So that's gonna be interesting. Okay, yeah, I don't know if this is a controversial opinion or not, but this is my favorite Sam Raimi, and probably my favorite Spider-Man villain. Yeah, I think so, yeah. But I think what makes this villain work so well is the fact that we see him as this person that Peter idolizes, that Peter wants to be like, and then we see him descend into this mad monster, into this mad creature and robot, and we think that that's what his destiny's gonna be like, that's what's gonna happen. It's gonna be a lot like with Norman Osborn. And then we see what happens at the end is he redeems himself. He will not die a monster. He redeems himself as a character, and Spider-Man wasn't the complete hero. It was Doc Ock. It was the villain, which is something you never see in these movies, as we see Doc Ock go through a similar, in a way, a hero arc, because Doc Ock was a hero, as well as Spider-Man was, and as well as Spider-Man is. And that's just what works so well and so perfectly about this film. I think it's one of the best comic book villains, movie villains, and probably one of the best villains ever, if I'm being honest. Okay, so yeah, I think this is probably an interesting one for most people that I have in my number 2, but the thing is that Magneto is a villain that we've seen pretty much the thing is, with all these other villains, we don't really get a prequel or that. I mean, once we get, never mind. You know it's gonna be number 1. I don't need to say it, but you know what it's gonna be. But I guess with that movie, I haven't seen that movie. But the thing is, normally some of the other villains, I don't really have prequels. I don't think. Maybe there's some of the other ones, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of the other ones I mentioned really have any prequels or anything. But we see Magneto the thing is, we see Magneto in the X-Men movies. He's really great. He wouldn't be up here if it was just in the first 3. And then when we get to First Class, we get to X-Men Days of Future Past, and X-Men Apocalypse, which isn't a very good movie, but Magneto's great in it. And X-Men Dark Phoenix, and he's probably the only okay thing in that movie, to be honest. And we see him from X-Men First Class to The Last Stand, and we see him progress so much as a character, and we see him go so much towards this villainy that he clearly doesn't want, that he didn't want at the beginning, but because of what happened to him and his complete different view on the world, and that is what happened to him as a character, and that's what made him be this completely different person with this whole different viewpoint than you would expect him to have if he didn't that he wouldn't have had if he didn't have the trauma that he had in his life. But with what happened to him and everything with that, it caused him to have this different view of the world. It caused him to have a different view that Xavier had, and it causes their friendship to break apart because of this. It causes all of that to just break away, and for him to descend into and become this villain. And that's what makes him such a compelling character. That's what makes him so interesting. That's what makes Magneto my second favorite comic book movie villain, is not from one movie, but from pretty much every single film he's been in. Do I need to explain why Joker from The Dark Knight is the best comic book movie villain? Do you want me to? Do you need me to? I could literally say anything, everything that I could possibly think of, and literally not one thing that I would say wouldn't have been said already 1,000 times. But yeah, it's the Joker from The Dark Knight. That's it. And that's the video. I'll see you guys in the next one.